Greetings, chess endgame fans. The Woldsman has some action for you, taken from the 2012 Girls World Junior Championships, held in Athens. The game is between Yulia Osmark and Irina Bulmaga. This encounter took place in the penultimate round. Both players finished high up in the field, and for Bulmaga in particular, the title of Women's Grandmaster was to play for. So let's introduce the two ladies. Yulia Osmark is from the Ukraine and was aged 14 in 2012. She's a very strong female player these days, an international master with a current FIDE rating of 2400 plus. Her opponent, Irina Bulmaga, is from Romania, and she was aged 18 at the time of the game. Now she's also an international master, and she also has a current FIDE rating of 2400 plus, so is also very strong indeed. As ever, the position is chosen for its instructional value, recognizing that everyone makes and can learn from mistakes in chess. So let's consider the position with white to play. It's a rook ending, and black has two pawns against white's solitary pawn. Now, where the two pawns are connected passes, the attacker generally has very good winning chances in this type of ending. So white is certainly up against it and has to rely on her passed flank pawn to escape defeat. But the problem is, if the h pawn can be exchanged for the d pawn, there are two further risk factors to think about if you're the white player. And the risk is that white's king will end up cut off one or more files from the e pawn on the long side of that passed pawn. If you look at the e pawn, there are 4 files to the left of the pawn, which is the long side, and 3 files to the right of the pawn, which is the short side. And so a combination of these factors would mean a loss. In fact, the difference between the long side and the short side is so important that if white's king stood on f1 instead of c1 in this position, the game would be drawn with best play. So white's king's unfortunately on the wrong bishop's pawn. Okay, preliminaries over. Let's cut to the action. Well, from here, play continued rook h8, planning to advance the h pawn, and so black swung a rook over to h4 to keep an eye on that outside passer. White pushed her pawn anyway to h6, and now black needed to be aggressive and close down the enemy king. And the best move here is king c4. And the idea is to meet h7 with king d3, gaining more ground. And if white responds with rook to d8, well, black's forced to capture the h-pawn, otherwise it queens. White captures a pawn back with check, rook takes d6. But black's king can get to the key square e2. And on this square, black not only controls the queening square e1, but the king also sets up a blockade preventing white's king from moving over. And this matters because after the further move rook e6, black has got a winning check. She can play rook to c7 check. And white's king has to give ground. If it goes to b2, for example, then rook c5 protects the e pawn and cuts the white king off 2 files from that passed pawn. And this establishes an easily winning position. However, black was timid, and instead she played the move king to c5. And the problem is that after the sequence h7, king d4, rook goes to d8, forcing black to capture on h7. White recaptures, rook takes d6. Well, here the difference is that the black king has only penetrated as far as e3. And now white can play rook e6 because this rook c7 check can be met by the move king d1, which is equal. So instead, black here played the move e4, reaching this position. Now the question is, well, what is white's best option from here? Is rook d7 a genuine black threat? Can white therefore afford to wait with a move like rook e8? Or should white make a king move? And if so, does it matter whether white goes king c2, allowing rook h2 check, or king d1, allowing rook h1 check, and after king c2, black checks anyway on h2. So if you'd like to think about white's next move, pause the video here. Well, welcome back if you had a go at this problem. Okay, well, rook d7 is a threat, and so ignoring it with the move rook e8 is no good. And the reason is because white's king is on the unfortunate long side of the passed e-pawn. And after rook d7, rook h8, king f2, the famous Lucena setup looms, and black will win the game. So congratulations if instead you chose the move king d1, which saves the game. So let's look at a couple of sample lines to establish this. Let's see what happens first of all if black checks on h1. The white king can come to c2. And now to make progress, black must give way with king f3. And white moves his king to d2, dealing with the passed pawn, and this holds the position. Well, there is an alternative. Black could try instead to check on d7, but white's king can move to e1. And if black threatens checkmate with rook a7, the square f1 is available. And now the white king is on the short side of the pawn, which is where it wants to be. Black checks on a1, the white king comes to g2, black moves his king to d3, hoping to advance the d-pawn, but the white king can come to f2, taking care of the passed pawn again, and this is sufficient to hold. Okay, well, unfortunately though, instead of king d1, Osmark put the move king c2 on the board, and this should have lost to rook d7 with the same idea that we saw a moment ago. But that didn't happen, and instead Bulmaga threw her opponent a lifeline, and she was tempted to play the check rook h2 check. Now white can move her king to d1. Check on h1 happened, and the white king moved back to c2. Now in the Woltzmann's endgame videos, we've seen that if a win can't be forced, then sneaky moves come into the reckoning. And here Bulmaga found just such a sneaky move. She played rook e1. And this obliges white to find the one drawing move available. So if you'd like to work out what has to be played here, pause the video again. Well, kudos if you had a go at this problem as well. Well, I can reveal that Osmark sadly didn't find the solution. She lost the game after king c3. If she just waits with rook e8, then king f2 will set up the Lucina pretty quickly as before. But king c3 is no improvement. Black checked, rook c1 check. The white king had to give ground, went to b2. Black played rook c5, cutting off the king. All white can do is to forlornly chase after the rook with king b3. The black king prepared the advance of the pawn, king d3. White gave a check. Black king came to e2, which is a nice square. White's king attacked the rook, but it simply fell back to c8 out of harm's way. So white's king did a U-turn. Black pushed. White king came to b2. Black king moved to e1. The white rook attacked the pawn. And now e2, establishing the Lucina setup. And after the further moves, king to b3, rook to c1, king to b2, rook to d1, king to c2, king f2. Well, here the game was resigned because that pawn is going to cost white her rook. Okay, so king c3 lost the game. Now the only option here was for white to go with the rook to h6, to the short side of the pawn. Although the checking distance on this side of the board is limited, this move is now sufficient because of the placement of black's rook on e1. And after king f2, rook h2 check. If black goes king g3, or indeed king f3, then white has the move king d2, and that is sufficient to hold. Okay, so there's one more line I'd like to show you in this very interesting endgame. Let's go back to the very start, where we saw that the moves rook h8, rook h4, h6 were played, and black made the mistake king c5, which was answered by h7. And in the game, the move king d4 was played, but black can instead try the move king d5, and this sets some challenges that are worth looking at. In response, white can bring a king over, the pawn advances, and now white must play the move king e2. That's forced. Black plays king to d4, and so white tries the plan of swinging the rook over to trade the h-pawn for the d-pawn. But black doesn't have to take that h-pawn immediately. She can throw in a check first, rook h2. And this is a critical position. White has to be careful here. Now if she retreats her king to e1, then this is a loss. Let's see why. Black must capture the pawn now. White takes with check. But king e3 is winning. There's a threat of checkmate on h1, so white runs to the short side. But black has this nice check from distance, rook f7 check. That's the key move here. And after the white king goes back, then the rook can swing over to the long side, threatening mate again. Rook a7. So white sticks with the plan of running to the short side. Black checks on a1. But after king g2, the move king e2 is decisive, and black will be able to establish a Lucina. Okay, but rewinding. Let's just rewind. There we go. Okay, instead of king e1, White can save herself with the move King F1. And this is important because it cuts out these threatened checkmates. Well, that H pawn is threatening to queen, so black must capture it. White plays the familiar recapture. And after King E3, because there is no threat of checkmate, White has time to put her rook on the long side of the pawn with rook to A6. And now after rook F7, King G2, these lateral checks from distance save White and hold the game. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed watching. The main takeaway from this video is the drawback of having your king stuck on the long side of a passed pawn in a rook and pawn ending.